Hey everyone, welcome back to CyberSecurityTV. This is episode 5 of the Unvalidated Redirect Vulnerability. Previously, we talked about how developer uses the hashing techniques to prevent this vulnerability. So today we're gonna see what else developer could do to avoid the issues and how to be, of course, from developer perspective, how to implement this correctly, and from the pen testing perspective, what things do we need to check. So first of all, what is the salted hash? That's the question we usually get. Also, not just in the interviews, but also if you just Google it, there are just so many people asking this question. So the salt is on top of a random value which you merge with the hash to make it more unique. Because once in the previous example, as we saw, once the attacker would figure it out what hashing algorithm are using, anyone could easily generate the hash and use it. Now, if you add a salt to it, it becomes unique. Now, the salt could be a unique to maybe each function. Maybe it's unique to per application, or maybe it's unique for per user. It could be again static, it could be dynamic. So every time user logs in and logs out, you would generate a new set of hash, or sorry, new set of salt. Or maybe it remains static per user throughout the lifetime of the when they're using the application. So there are several attributes to this salt, but the underlying concept is you try to make the hash as complex as possible, and that's why you would add the salt to it. Now, the salt is nothing but maybe some random string, maybe you have some keywords. Now we'll take a look at the demo and I'll show you what we have. Of course, our example is going to be simple, but you can absolutely relate it to the real-time examples. And also, after this one, I'll also talk about some real-world experience that I had with salted hash. So let's jump onto the VM and talk about that. All right, so this is the application that we'll use for our demo today. You can pretty much ignore this details. If you have not watched the previous video, this is these are all the algorithms that the PHP supports for the hashing. We're just displaying here or echo here for information, but yeah, there's nothing in here that we need right now. But okay, so in this example, what it does is if you click on here, of course, it's gonna redirect us to the our Facebook page, CyberSecurityTV, and where we usually post our details and updates and everything. Uh, First of all, let's copy this link location, right? And let me paste it here. Now, if I'm an attacker, or if I'm a pen tester, and if I want user to, let's say, instead of going to the Facebook, I want the user to go to the google.com. Right, so I'll just write this thing and I'll send it to the user via chat or Skype or Google Chat. They'll click on it and I'm hoping that they will redirect to the attacker site, but in this case it's not, because it's doing some sort of hash validation. So in the backend, developer is validating whether the hash matches to the URL or not. Now let's try to generate hash. From our previous example, we know that developer is using MD5. So what we'll do is we'll get a hash list and we'll select the MD5. Of course, in the real world example, you may have to trial and error. You have to try multiple of them. Sometimes you'll be able to figure out based on the length of the hash. As you can see, for example, this one, SHA512 is pretty much longer in terms of the length than the MD5. So that's how sometimes you can figure out how big is the hash, so you can eliminate some obvious options. Now let's replace this with our newly generated hash. Copy it and try to redirect user. We are still not able to redirect. Now in the previous example we could, because the developer was just using the hash. Now this time they're also using the salting techniques. So what happens is I have also created one page where we can also calculate the hashes with the salt, and I would highly recommend if you are working in the pen tester, or if you want to get into the pen testing and something, you have this script handy, so every time you have to create something, you can easily do so. So let's just type the URL we want user to redirect. In this example, I know I'm pending preparing the hash. Now the salt is something like it how the developer is going to implement it, it varies. Sometimes developer will append the salt to the hash. So for example, let's say our hash is 123 123 123, right? And salt is ASD. Now sometimes what the developer is gonna do is, let me copy this and to make sense. Okay, so sometimes what developer will do is, sometimes they'll have the salt here and then go like this. Sometimes they will also have like hash here and then maybe salt here, and sometimes they'll also have like hash and then some delimiter like a, let's say, hyphen, and then have the salt. So this is something you would have to look out when you are doing the pen testing. Just try to observe and pay attention to each and every parameter and its value, because you'll be able to figure out based on that whether they're using salt or not. Now in this example, I know the salt is CyberSecurityTV, right? And that's our URL. We want to prepend the hash. Let's generate the hash list. So our hash is this. Now let's go back here. Instead of this, let me put here and remove the space character. Okay, now this should work because we have used the right hash, right salt, and that's why we are able to redirect, because it matches to the URL that we have provided. So this is in a nutshell, this is how the developer usually uses the salting technique to kind of prevent the redirect vulnerability. Now let's go back to our slide. Now for the pen tester, right? As we already saw that salt can be appended, could be a separate parameter, right? So instead of hash, there's also a parameter name called salt, and where you have the salt attached to it. And sometimes in the real world, I have seen this mistakes, like salt is usually very secretive thing which you do not want to disclose to the people, like in an easy way as an individual parameter or obvious name. So if you see something like that, definitely raise that as a vulnerability and make sure your developer fix that vulnerability. But as a pen tester, yeah, just look out for such parameters and see if you can find any obvious salt. Um, Now the usual questions, like general question I've been asked is, how do we figure out what the salt is? So I know it's very difficult to figure out the salt, and if the developer is using, let's say, long salt like a 15-20 characters, then it's very hard to find it. But you can always take a chance and perform some sort of dictionary attack to figure out what the salt is. Of course, with the scripts and everything available with so many tools, it's not very difficult to run the dictionary attack or something. So of course that's something we can do. And then you have to try every combination of the hashing algorithm, because first step, you have to determine which algorithm is the developer using, either MD5, SHA, or other algorithm. Once you figure that out, you have to figure out the salt, and then you have to try every combination, whether appending, prepending, or putting it in between, or with some delimiter or something. So it's going to be a lot of time consuming task. So make sure you be patient and work through it, because this is not going to be easy in the real world to figure out what the salt and the hash is. Now, as far as the developer is concerned, make sure you are not using static salt, or even if you are using, you have a strict policy of changing the salt every now and then. And also, of course, do not use obvious parameter names where you pass the salt on, and it should not be passed into as an individual parameter because anyone can easily figure it out. So just only use the parameter which you like within the post request or the get request. Just use the parameters which you really have to use, because sometimes what I've also seen is people would use cookie for session authentication, right, to keep the session tokens, but then they'll also keep the session tokens in the URL string, which does not make any sense. Why would you keep the session token in both the places? So those are the things you will have to look for, and of course, as and when you get experience, you'll try to figure this thing out pretty easily. So that's all I want to discuss in this video. I hope you like this episode. This is, I guess, the last episode of our unvalidated redirect vulnerability. If you got any comments, questions, please feel free to write me in the comment box. Hit the thumbs up button, like button on the right below the video, so I know you would like to have more videos like this. And I'll see you guys next week. Thanks.